Hi, I'm Andrew Gray, Curator of Herpetology at the museum, and herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. And I've been asked to talk to you today a little bit about some of the methods that I use when I'm actually working with reptiles and amphibians in the wild. And part of my job is to research them and answer some questions, interesting questions about where they live. Much of the work that I do is in places like the tropics, in places like Costa Rica and the Amazon. And what I'd like to do is to actually share some of the information with you, some of the ways of collecting information and collecting data that gives us a really good understanding of how these animals live. There's a variety of different ways, but one of the most important things is to actually have a good understanding of the question that you want answered before you actually even go out into the field. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to relate much of this to reptiles and amphibians, which are what I'm familiar with working with, although I believe that you're going to be covering how to work with mammals and insects as well. So one of the things you might want to look at when you're asking questions about wildlife in general, and particularly the amount of diversity in a particular area, what is the diversity? Is it that you're looking for how many different species there are? Is it that perhaps you're looking for how many of one particular species there is? So you might have identified one that you're particularly interested in studying. You might want to know how many of that particular species there are there. So it's really important, as I said before, that you understand what question you're asking. Now, if you're looking to assess biodiversity, there's a variety of different ways you can do that. With reptiles and amphibians, one of the ways we do it is to actually go out there and look for them actively. There's different ways that you can do it without doing that. You can actually set traps for animals, and you can go back and you can assess how many you've caught within a particular time. Oh yes, loads. Brilliant. Got some really big ones in there. These are really good ones. Look at these tadpoles. These are Phalamedusa valentii. Really hard to catch because this starts a school. You see in there. Hang on a minute. There's a really good one there. And one of the things that's really important is that you keep your standards and your variables absolutely the same. Because if you go out looking, say, for snakes on a particular night, how many snakes you can find in an area, it might have been raining all day, it might be quite cold, but those snakes might need warmth. Lots of them are cold-blooded and they need heat, so they're a lot more active when it's warm. So again, measuring things like the temperature could be really important for your study. If it was an amphibian, maybe the fact that it's more moist or it's more humid that evening could also have an effect. So again, measuring some of these variables that surround your question would be really, really important. And the amount of people. If you're doing what we call a transect, where you walk a particular length of the rainforest, say, and you're looking for different frogs, it's really important that you have a set distance, that it perhaps takes you a set length of time to do that, so you're not walking too fast, you're not walking too slow. And maybe even you've got the set amount of people, because if you've got 3 people all looking out for these reptiles and amphibians, and then the next night you go out, or the year later when you go and try and replicate the study, you've only got 1 person, then that's going to skew your results. So standardisation is really, really important. One of the ways that we actually look and find actively reptiles and amphibians is to go looking for them at night with a torch and spotting them. Most of the reptiles and amphibians are nocturnal, so it's a really good time to look for them. And you use your eyes and you also use your ears. Using a torch, you look around and you're walking very, very slowly through what is often quite dense undergrowth. But one really good way to actually find a lot of these things, and you can also do it for mammals and even spiders, is to use your torch very up to your head, very close to your eyes, and actually use it in conjunction with your eyesight. So you're always looking where your beam of your torch is all the time. And after you've been out in the wild, in the field for a long time, it almost becomes natural So it's almost like it's not dark. You're actually looking in that beam and you can see, and you become accustomed to looking, even for snakes and for frogs, because they're very, even with a light on them at night, they're very, very well camouflaged. Once you start to see them, you see more of them. So again, that's something that you might want to take into consideration. If you're doing a study over a week, you might be better at spotting frogs the first night than you are the last. But one good way is to look for what we call eye shine. And when your light hits the eye of a frog, it reflects back, so you can see these little eyes in the distance.
All you can see is just two beams coming back here. That's the caiman.
The other way to find frogs is to listen, and that's the way we mostly find the frogs. We track them down through listening, because every single frog in the world, every different species has a different call. It's got a different vocalization, and that is something that can tell you exactly what species you're looking for and what you're hoping to see. Now, you could even do a survey without even finding the animals, because if you're very good and you can record those calls, you can identify them without seeing them. Obviously it helps if you can find them to positively identify them. But again, as we've said before, temperature, humidity levels can even change the vocalizations of a frog. Many frogs have got 2 or 3, maybe even 5 or 6 different calls, so it's important to know all the different calls of a frog that you're looking for. If you're working with one particular frog and you wanted to find out how many of that species there are, perhaps around a pond, one good method is to actually mark the frogs when you find them, so that you know which ones you've found and go back a previous night and even another night. So you know which ones you found a previous night, and you're going back another night to actually assess them again. So the first night you would perhaps find as many frogs as you can within a set time within that area. You would then mark them on the leg, perhaps on the right arm, and then the following night go back and try and find out how many you've seen from the night before that have got the marking on the arm, but also how many new ones you can find. You then mark all of them on the left arm, so some have got right and left markings, some have only got ones on the left hand side. You then go back a third night and you know which ones you've collected the first night, how many you collected the second night, and how many new ones you've actually collected on the third night. And you can calculate out how many are actually, and quite accurately, how many frogs are actually in a population within one specific area. So when we're looking for different animals, there's lots of clues that we can look for and different ways we can find them. One of them is to actively go looking for them at night, but there's also quite a few other ways that are really, really valid. One of them, if you're looking for mammals, is to set what's called a camera trap. So it's in a fixed position, and if the animal goes past, it trips a wire and it takes a photograph of that particular animal. So within a set time, so within a week, you could see how many times that animal has passed, or maybe how many other animals. But it's very difficult to use these because you don't know if it's the same animal unless it's got specific markings, or whether it's actually a different animal. So it's quite difficult, but it does tell you that that species is there. So if you wanted to know if there was a jaguar in your forest, you could use that to identify, well, actually, is it a jaguar, or is it an ocelot, or is it something else perhaps related? But there's many different ways. As I say, camera traps are one. For reptiles and amphibians, we set traps in different ways. One of them is called a drift fence, and it's like it's a fence along the floor. You clear the surrounding kind of vegetation, and you can use anything really. You can use plastic, you can use cloth, and along the fence you put posts into the ground, little sticks into the ground, and basically it's a fence to stop anything passing. It's over a certain distance, so any reptiles that come along at night, maybe a snake might come along and it might hit that fence, has to go either one way or the other way. You put stones along the bottom so that it can't get underneath, or soil, and then it goes along the fence, and at the end of the fence at each side you have a great big container, a big bucket, so the snake falls into the bucket. And the only thing with that is you have to go back very regularly. You have to check them, because if a frog's fallen in and then your snake falls in, it will eat the frog. So there's many different ways that you can assess for them. You can assess for them even from the tracks. You might be walking along a particular area, you might be looking around, and you might find other clues. You might find a little footprint, you could find some fur, perhaps on a branch that's been brushed off the animal. You could find some bones, you could find something that it's eaten. You could find some poo, so you can identify the poo. And I know some researchers that are, they just focus on assessing the poo to evaluate what animals are there. It sounds quite funny, but it's true. And so there's many different ways. We've talked before a little bit about listening out to know kind of what frogs are out there in the forest, and the same can be done for mammals like monkeys that call during the day. So there's many different ways. One of the other ways is to actually put one of these fences and mark a certain area out, a set size, so you can compare it to another size, and literally go through it with a very fine tooth comb, and you measure everything and monitor everything that's within that area. So I think in your worksheets you've actually got some of these things mentioned, but I just wanted to cover them and for you to assess really what methods you would use if you were going to investigate the animal of your choice.